This scientist shares this new discovery that points to God and that actually proves that God is real. So let's get right into the video. So make sure to watch to the end so you know how to answer these questions. Let's get right into it.
That question was going to be pretty simple and easy to understand. Thomas Henry
And they
Huxley,
assumed that why?
They assumed it because they thought life was very simple. Thomas Henry Huxley, who was Darwin's famous bulldog, said that the cell was a simple, homogeneous globule of undifferentiated protoplasm. And they thought that life was essentially a kind of chemical. It was made of an essential substance called protoplasm, which was a kind of jello or goo that could be produced by a few simple chemical reactions. And our knowledge of what the simple cell is actually composed of, as Jim has just said, has advanced massively since then. Huxley had no idea, Darwin had no idea what we would discover. And now we know that inside living cells, we have at the very least an information storage, transmission, and processing system, which is part of a whole automated system for building proteins and protein machines. These nano machines that Jim makes, as you correctly point out, are as he puts it, child's play. He has these massive chemical recipes that are involved, multiple steps, interventions, and manipulations to build the much simpler miniature machines that he can build. They're much simpler than the ones that are found inside cells. And so the problem has, as he puts it, it's receded off into the distance because our knowledge of the complexity of life has meant that it's much, much harder to envision how that might have arisen by a series of undirected chemical processes.
Reading your work, Steve, if I understand it correctly, there's a big moment, and funnily enough, the big moment happens at about the same time as the Miller-Urey experiments, and that big moment is Watson and Crick in 1953, and you get the double helix. They understand the structure of DNA, and suddenly they can see how complicated DNA is. And every living cell, first of all, I want to make sure I get this right. Every living cell contains DNA. Is this correct?
DNA,
okay.
RNA, proteins.
So a few quotations that you present in your book, Signature in the Cell. Bill Gates, DNA is like a computer program. Biotechnologist Leroy Hood, DNA represents, quote, digital code. Richard Dawkins himself, the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like, close quote.
That just points to a creator like no other. Like, in order for something to be created, there has to be a designer. In order for something to actually function and work, there was someone behind it. People who wrote the computer code just didn't happen out of nowhere. Someone was behind it and they wrote the code. For our cells, someone wrote the code. And that's God, the creator of the universe. Anyway, let's continue to watch.
So doesn't this pose just a gigantic new problem? Again, let Stephen Jay Gould and whatever they want to argue about evolution. We are concerned with this first box, and it's still empty. And the first box is the first life. And not only is it empty, but Tour comes along and says, oh, you have no idea. The simplest forms of life require such complex chemistry. It is and then Meyer comes along and says, well, wait a minute, fellows. What about Watson and Crick? Every cell contains DNA, and you're not going to create a 3 billion item long strand of DNA with hitting ammonia with lightning, no matter how many times you do the experiment. Is that not correct?
Well, right.
This empty box is now a source of awe, really, right?
Exactly. If we go back to the Miller-Urey experiment.
He says that you're not gonna make up even just a single form of DNA with something random happening. It's just impossible. It's never gonna happen. You need a creator. So good.
Two big classes of problems. One is that they synthesize the amino acids using alleged prebiotic gases. They synthesize it based on gases in those flasks that don't simulate the actual atmosphere on the early Earth. But secondly, the amino acids that they produced were a mixture, and there was a mixture of all kinds of other things that had to be eliminated for those amino acids to hook up in a way that would be life-friendly. But they also didn't explain how they would hook up and how they would hook up in the precise sequence to actually form proteins. So it's like it's the difference between letters and words that means something. You have a bag of Scrabble letters and you dump them on the table. That does not give you a triple word score in the game. Okay, but the Watson and Crick discovery is seminal, but it's the beginning of a whole series of discoveries in what historians of biology now call the molecular biological revolution. In 1953, Watson and Crick elucidate the double helical structure of the DNA molecule.
Right.
But then 5 years later, Francis Crick, who was a code breaker in World War II, realizes that the subunits along the spine of the DNA molecule are functioning like alphabetic characters in a written text or like the digital characters in a section of software. In fact, George Gamow, one of the great physicists of the time, realized very quickly that the string of A's, G's, and T's along the spine of the DNA could be represented as readily represented as a digital bit string. And so what you have, and what Crick realizes, he calls this the sequence hypothesis, is that DNA contains information for the construction of the proteins and protein machines that are needed to keep cells alive. So it's very much like our modern CAD/CAM technology that's used in say, a Boeing plant, where an engineer will sit at a console, write some code. The code is then translated into another machine code that can direct the function of a manufacturing apparatus. So maybe at Boeing, the code from the engineer would put the rivets on the airplane wing in just the right place. Or younger people are aware of these 3D printers,
yes,
where we have digital information directing the construction of three-dimensional mechanical or other structures. That's what's actually going on inside cells. It's not just that there's code, it's code that's directing the production of three-dimensional proteins and protein machines that are absolutely essential for everything the cell does.
So even the simplest cell contains DNA, and DNA turns out, and even, I presume I'm putting it correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, even the simplest DNA turns out to be a fantastically complicated and sophisticated instruction manual.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
If you're an atheist out there, if you're just someone who's just really contemplating, is there really a God? Is there really a creator? I don't know what. The human body, the human cells, any cells at all, just has to point to a creator. It has to point to someone behind the product. There's a mind behind it. It was literally like digital code and literally like a computer. Like all that stuff that we're talking about had to have a creator. Someone was behind it making things happen. And what makes you think there wasn't someone behind the human life form? Anyway, guys, that's so interesting, so crazy, so awesome. I want to know your comments down below, whatever that may be. Please, guys, turn to Jesus. Go to him. He loves you so much. And also, make sure to like this video and subscribe. I'm trying to hit to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Thank you guys so much for watching. Peace.